So, I got the chance to reconnect with some of my friends over in Colorado, who are also of the Sioux tribe and Arapaho. These are the people that shared with me the same tales recently that I've discussed with you. The Dogman and Bigfoot waging wars against each other to be able to eat the Arapaho tribe that was defending themselves against these beasts. They love and watch your channel, and they wanted me to share more of their stories that they have. These are stories that they have obtained from their own chiefs that have been passed down from generations, as well as more tales from their own tribe that they would like to share with you. My other friend, who is part Sioux, also has very similar tales from his own tribe, dealing with not only Bigfoot and Dogman, but what they consider to be the Thunderbird as well, especially more so in the Great Plains area. There were just certain places that were off limits for hunting and foraging, for any sort of food and supplies, because these large birds patrolled the perimeter of the area. Usually, it was always in the upper mountainside, but other times it wasn't. Supposedly, somewhere along the way, one of the chief's daughters had befriended a Thunderbird and was able to ride it before it tricked her and knocked her off its back while up in midair, and she fell to her death. Thunderbirds, from what I've gathered, aren't near as hostile as Dogmen are, or Bigfoot, but they would take pride in stealing kills from hunters by swooping down and taking the deer whole or waiting for the kill to claim the body. Unlike other birds, they have a very distinctive call, kind of like how a hawk does, or even an eagle. You could hear it from far away and know exactly what kind of bird it was. I wasn't told any story about a Thunderbird having a conflict with a Bigfoot or a Dogman, but I'm sure it has happened. They were more elusive than the other two creatures and were not near as hostile or aggressive. They were not attacking villages, but they were waiting and watching a lot of the time. Many of the times, they would show up in full view of the villages and they would bring upon them storms, droughts, famine, and worse. They almost acted like an omen, even though they weren't seen as much. There is a reason they have a name Thunderbird. Although the Arapaho and Sioux Indians had their own name for them, just like they did with Dogman and Bigfoot, I don't think their name had any direct translation to Thunderbird, but it did mean something similar. The one friend of mine who was Sioux Indian shared with me some stories about back in the early 1800s, that these giant blackbirds with white markings on them would fly out of the mountains in South Dakota, fly down, pick up villagers and hunters, even white men, and fly up high in the air and drop them to kill them. From the sounds of it, these things didn't fly into the villages, but anybody who wandered into a specific area or territory was generally targeted. This leads me to believe that between both my friends who shared very similar stories, that the Thunderbird is not only a very real cryptid, but, like the other two cryptids, Dogman and Bigfoot, are very territorial beings. While seeming much more elusive, they still can be just as dangerous, since they can just easily pick a person up with ease and drop them from 100+ feet in the air to their death. A couple of hunters had found a large bird nest, as they described, near the base of one of the mountains that they were near, and found many human skulls and bones. It wasn't made entirely clear if these cryptids would pick people up and drop them from the sky to kill them and then eat them, or if it was just a killing tactic to eliminate threats. The feathers from these creatures were humongous. These creatures persisted even when white men started traveling to the area and colonizing. They too became victim and knew the ferocity of these cryptids. Unfortunately, muzzle loaders and guns didn't seem to be effective against these kinds of flying beasts, but there were certain areas that they would not venture into in fear that these things would grab them. I'm almost wondering if states with very rocky terrain, with lots of mountains and hills, makes the perfect environment for these kinds of cryptids. Plenty of places to hide, and more than enough places to have a nest without anyone ever bothering you or discovering where you are. Even today, there is still miles upon miles of wilderness all over the U.S. that remains uncharted or too thick for us humans to venture off into. It's very possible that these things have made their nests in places that are impossible for us to get to, especially with the vast amount of mountains and steep cliffs that are all over. In fact, I recently listened to one of your other Thunderbird stories, where a gentleman climbed down a steep cliff, if I'm remembering correctly, and discovered what he thought was a Thunderbird's nest. Well, his description was pretty close to what my friend's story matched up with. And his story, I believe, they were animal bones, but in that story I got from my friend, they only found human remains. I don't really tend to find too much evidence though, based on what I know about these things, that there's any signs of them ever being on the East Coast. However, the signs that I was hearing about that happen on the East Coast resemble that of a pterodactyl. Those sightings go all the way down to the southern Florida area, even into Cuba. No, it's not a thunderbird, but there seems to be a continuity with these large flying bird-like cryptids all around the United States. Going back to that Thunderbird encounter though you posted, before the man who went down to the cliff in Northern California, I had heard other Thunderbird encounters around that area before. It seems like when you mix mountain cliffs and forests, you create the environment for these things to thrive in. I personally believe that's why there are so many good sightings in the state of Colorado, such as reptilians, Bigfoot, Dogman, Thunderbird, and more. I find it very interesting that several of the supposed encounters and sightings that many of the natives recall of this Thunderbird are usually all large blackbirds of some sort. They all talk about the same thing, distinctive white markings on their body, which never seem to coincide with a specific pattern or shape. I've heard some descriptions that talk about it being very similar looking to a stark black eagle, while others say that it looks more like a raven. I've heard others say that it looks like its own bird entirely, with a pointed down beak at the end, kind of like a falcon has. Either way, we need to keep close eyes on the skies around us when we're out, and if we see something large flying our way, we know it's near. A family friend of mine operates a small seaplane business in Florida where people pay a small sum of money and he takes them out on a tour throughout overlooking the Everglades. Well, it was my birthday, and I had never been on a plane before. Shocking, I know. Just so you can get an idea of how small these planes are, they're practically 2-passenger planes, I think. You know, the ones that fly over water. They're pretty small compared to any commercial airline, but large enough for you to get around in. They aren't luxurious by any means, and I'm not a planes girl by any means, so I just know they're called seaplanes. If I had to guess, I'm gonna say 20 to 30 feet from the front nose to the very back. I really have no idea how big the wingspan is. As I was saying, this family friend of mine took me out for my birthday, and we're flying over the Everglades, and when he starts panicking and pointing out in front of us, flying a little underneath us and perpendicular was the largest bird we have ever seen in our lives. I vaguely heard of a creature called the Thunderbird, but I've not known what it is. Now, I don't know if this is a Thunderbird or if it's real, but I do know now that there are very large birds out there that far exceed any size we know about. The bird I saw was extremely large and a very predatory looking bird at that. All gray that faded to a smoky charcoal color. This bird had a wingspan that easily matched the size of the plane we were in. I couldn't believe it. My friend and I were in total awe and could not stop staring at this monstrosity of a bird. It was flying relatively low, only a little higher than the tips of the trees, and it never once seemed to look up in our direction or even care that we were flying over. It didn't come across like it was in a hurry, just calmly flying in the direction it was heading, which was south. It's all him and I could talk about for the rest of the flight. We had no idea what kind of bird it was, and we're convinced that we discovered a new species of swamp bird. Little do I know now that I probably more than likely saw an actual Thunderbird in the flesh.